I pulled into the marina parking lot 6 days ahead of schedule. The captain had turned the boat around after Tommy Reeves slipped on the deck and shattered his femur in 3 places. Coast Guard medevac took him off near Sabine Pass, and Captain Hargrove decided one man short wasn't worth the risk with another week of crabbing left. 6 weeks on the water, and I'd pictured this moment 100 times. Sophie waiting on the porch with that beat-up notebook she carried everywhere, already reading me whatever new story she'd written while I was gone. Karen maybe waving from the kitchen window. Instead, I came home to a locked house and a lawn that hadn't been mowed in weeks. The spare key was under the same fake rock it had always been. Inside, the air was stale, like no one had opened a window in days. Karen's shoes were by the door. Her purse was on the counter, but the house felt hollow. Sophie's room stopped me cold. My daughter was a mess maker, proud of it too. Books stacked in towers on every surface, notebooks with dog-eared pages, a collection of colored pens she guarded like treasure. Her desk was bare. Her bookshelf was half empty. The quilt my first wife, Dana, had sewn before she passed was folded at the foot of the bed in a perfect square. Sophie never folded that quilt. She slept tangled in it every night. I called Karen. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Nathan." Her voice went tight. "You're not supposed to be back until next Thursday. Tommy got hurt. Where's Sophie?" Silence. The kind that sits heavy in your chest. "She's at a program. I told you about it. Brother Thomas's Youth Foundation out past Fredericksburg. It's been wonderful for her, Nathan. She's learning responsibility, outdoor skills, team building. She needed structure while you were gone. She was falling behind in school and spending all her time scribbling in those notebooks instead of doing homework. I didn't remember any conversation about a program. 6 weeks of satellite calls that dropped every 3 minutes. Static-filled voicemails I couldn't make out half the time. Maybe she'd mentioned it. Maybe she hadn't. Give me the address. Nathan, don't do this. You'll embarrass her in front of the other kids. She's finally making progress. Brother Thomas says she's showing real improvement. Improvement from what? She's 10. From being difficult. From the attitude. From refusing to do chores and talking back and crying about her mother every single night. I tried. Nathan, I tried for 8 months to be patient, but she needed more than I could give her. Brother Thomas's program is designed for kids like Sophie. Kids like Sophie, my daughter who wrote stories about talking cats and wanted to be a librarian. The address, Karen. She gave it to me. New Horizon Youth Foundation, Farm Road 1623, about 90 minutes northwest. Then she said something that made the hair on my arm stand up. Just don't overreact when you see it. It looks rougher than it is. The kids are outside a lot, and that's the whole point. Fresh air and hard work build character. I was already in the truck. The drive took me through hill country, past limestone bluffs and cedar breaks and ranches with cattle gates. Beautiful land. The kind of place that made you understand why people came to Texas. Farm Road 1623 turned narrow past Blanco, winding through peach orchards and scrubland. My GPS signal flickered and died twice. I followed hand-painted signs that said New Horizon Youth Foundation with an arrow and a cross. The property sat at the end of a dirt road. An old farmhouse with a wraparound porch, painted white but peeling. A metal building behind it, like a workshop or a barn. And beyond that, rows and rows of peach trees stretching toward the hills. A chain-link fence ran the perimeter with no barbed wire, but the gate had a padlock on the inside. I parked outside the fence and climbed over. The farmhouse door was locked. I knocked. Nothing. I walked around back toward the orchard, and that's when I heard them. Children's voices, not playing, not laughing, working, the low murmur of exhaustion. There were maybe 25 kids spread through the orchard. Youngest looked about 6, oldest maybe 13. They carried buckets and bags, picking peaches from the lower branches, climbing short ladders for the higher ones. The temperature was pushing 97 degrees. A few had hats, most didn't. 2 adults watched from the shade of the metal building, folding chairs and water bottles at their feet. I found Sophie in the 4th row. She was on a stepladder, reaching for a branch above her head. Her arms were scratched raw from the bark. Her lips were peeling. She wore a shirt 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and shorts with dirt ground into the fabric so deep they'd never come clean. Her hair, which Dana used to braid every morning before school, was matted and tangled. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 6 weeks. I said her name. Not loud, just her name. She turned on the ladder, looked at me like I was a ghost. Then her face crumpled, and she half fell, half jumped off that ladder into my arms. The bucket of peaches hit the ground and rolled. Daddy, Daddy, you're here. You're really here. I'm here, baby. I've got you. She was shaking so hard I thought she might come apart. I could feel her ribs through that oversized shirt. When had she gotten so thin? They told me you weren't coming. They told me you signed papers and you didn't want me anymore. That I was too much trouble and you sent me here because I was bad. Brother Thomas said my real mom died because God was punishing me for being ungrateful, and if I didn't work harder, you'd die on the boat too, and it'd be my fault. Everything went white for a second. A rage so clean and total it was almost calm. Listen to me. None of that is true. Not one word. I never signed anything. I didn't know you were here. And what he said about your mom, Sophie, that is a lie. Do you hear me? That is a lie. She just held on tighter. The other kids had stopped picking. They were watching us. A girl about Sophie's age with sunburn so bad her shoulders were blistered. A boy with a bandage on his hand that hadn't been changed in days, the gauze brown with dirt. Little ones who should have been in summer camp swimming and making friendship bracelets, standing in an orchard with peach juice and sweat running down their faces. Hey! One of the adults was walking toward us. Big guy, sunglasses, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. Sir, this is private property. You need to leave immediately. That's my daughter. These children are in Brother Thomas's legal care. You can't just walk in here and remove a program participant. We have signed agreements from every family. I'm not asking your permission. He keyed his walkie-talkie. We got a situation at the East Orchard. Need Brother Thomas out here now. Sophie had buried her face in my neck. Her voice was small. Daddy, don't let them put me back. Please. I'll be good forever. I promise I'll never complain about anything. Just don't leave me. I shifted her to my left arm and started walking toward the fence. 3 more people appeared from the metal building. 2 men and a woman. One of the men was older, mid-60s, silver hair combed back neat, wearing pressed khakis and a white linen shirt, like he was heading to a country club. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd talked his way out of every corner he'd ever been backed into. Mr. Cole. His voice was warm, practiced, the kind of warmth that comes from repetition, not feeling. I'm Brother Thomas. I understand you're concerned, but I assure you, Sophie has been thriving in our program. She's learning discipline, teamwork, the satisfaction of honest labor. Karen and I discussed at length what would be best for your daughter while you were at sea. My daughter is sunburned, underweight, and covered in scratches. She just told me you said her dead mother was God's punishment. Brother Thomas's smile didn't waver. Children sometimes misinterpret our spiritual guidance. We teach accountability, not blame. Sophie has some deep emotional wounds from losing her mother, and our program addresses those through structured activity and faith-based counseling. I kept walking. He stepped into my path. Mr. Cole, if you remove Sophie from this property, you'll be in violation of the temporary guardianship agreement Karen signed. I'll have no choice but to contact the authorities. Do you really want your daughter to see her father arrested? Call them. His smile flickered. Just for a second. Nathan, be reasonable. You've been gone 6 weeks. You don't know what Sophie's been like. The tantrums, the refusing to eat, the nightmares that kept Karen up all night. Karen was desperate. She came to us because she loves your daughter and didn't know what else to do. My daughter has nightmares because her mother died 2 years ago. She doesn't eat when she's anxious. She writes stories to cope. She doesn't need to pick fruit in 100-degree heat. She needs her father. The big guy with the walkie-talkie moved to block the gate. The woman positioned herself behind me. The other man stood off to the side, phone in his hand, filming. Mr. Cole. Brother Thomas's voice had dropped the warmth. It was flat now, cold. You're making a mistake. These children are here legally. Their families placed them here willingly. Whatever Sophie told you, she's a child with behavioral issues who has been known to exaggerate. Put her down and let's discuss this like adults. Sophie whispered in my ear. Daddy, there's a shed behind the barn. That's where he puts kids who cry. It's dark in there. It locks from outside. He put me in there for a whole day because I asked to call you. I looked at Brother Thomas, looked at the children still standing in the orchard, watching. A little boy, couldn't have been more than 7, had drifted closer. He was staring at me with eyes that were way too old for his face. "Mister," he said quietly, "are you somebody's dad?" "Yeah, buddy. Can you be my dad too? Just for today? I haven't talked to mine in a long time." Something in my chest cracked open. Brother Thomas snapped his fingers. "Elijah, get back to your row. Now." The boy flinched and shuffled backward. I adjusted Sophie's weight and pulled out my phone. 1 bar. Barely enough. I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up. I told her what I was looking at. The big guy tried to take my phone. 6 weeks of hauling crab traps, mending lines, working the winch in rough seas. I caught his wrist and pushed him back one-handed. He stumbled into the fence. Brother Thomas was on his own phone now, talking fast, low. The sheriff's department sent 2 units. First one arrived in 14 minutes. Longest 14 minutes of my life. Brother Thomas spent them trying to convince me to leave, then threatening me with lawsuits, then switching back to the warm voice like nothing had happened. The children stood frozen in the orchard the whole time. Not one of them made a sound. That silence told me more than anything Sophie had said. The deputy who stepped out of the first cruiser was a woman. Sergeant Vega, according to her nameplate. She was maybe 40, built solid, with a face that looked like it had heard every lie in the world and was tired of all of them. She looked at me, holding Sophie, at Brother Thomas, with his pressed khakis and practiced smile, at the children in the orchard, at the big guy rubbing his wrist by the fence. "Start talking," she said. "Both of you, one at a time. You first." She pointed at me. I told her everything. Sophie told her more. Sergeant Vega listened without interrupting. When Sophie described the shed, the sergeant's jaw tightened. When Sophie said Brother Thomas told her that her mother's death was her fault, Sergeant Vega closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, she turned to Brother Thomas. "I'm going to need to see the premises. All of it." "Of course, Sergeant. We have nothing to hide. But you'll need a warrant to enter the residential areas. Our lawyers have been very clear about our constitutional protections under religious liberty." "Sir, I've got 24 minors working in an orchard in dangerous heat, a child in my presence showing signs of neglect and malnutrition, and testimony about a confinement structure on this property. That's my probable cause. Now you can show me voluntarily, or you can wait while I call a judge. But those children are not picking one more peach today." Brother Thomas's composure cracked. Not all at once, but enough. The jaw tightened. The eyes went hard. He nodded to the woman on his staff. "Show the sergeant the main house." "All of it," Sergeant Vega said. "Every room, every building, every locked door. And call CPS. I want a caseworker here within the hour." What they found took 5 hours to process. The shed Sophie described was a converted tool storage behind the barn. 6 feet by 4 feet, no windows, a bolt lock on the outside. Scratch marks on the interior walls at a child's height. A blanket on the concrete floor that smelled like urine. The main house had a dormitory in the basement. 32 cots packed wall to wall. 1 bathroom. A schedule posted on the wall that started at 5 a.m. and ended at 9 p.m. 14 hours of work, Bible study, work, meals, more work, no free time, no phone access. The word discipline appeared on that schedule 11 times. In Brother Thomas's office, they found the financial records. New Horizon Youth Foundation had contracts with 3 regional fruit distributors. The peach harvest from 40 acres of orchard was sold commercially under a shell company name. Revenue for the past year was over $400,000. The children were never paid. Their families were told the program was free, a charitable ministry. Some families had even donated on top of sending their kids. 38 children across 2 locations, Sophie's orchard and a second property near Llano, where kids were working a vegetable farm. The youngest was 5. A little girl named Rosie, who'd been dropped off by a grandmother who thought she was sending her to Bible camp. I sat in my truck with Sophie, while all of this unfolded around us. A paramedic checked her over. Dehydration, a borderline case of heat exhaustion, malnutrition. The scratches on her arms were infected. She'd lost 11 pounds in 6 weeks. "She needs fluids and a full workup at the hospital," the paramedic told me. Sophie grabbed my hand. "I'm staying with my dad. I'll follow the ambulance, sweetheart. I will be right behind you the entire time. I am not going anywhere." She searched my face for the lie. "Didn't find one." "Okay. Karen showed up around 7. She parked her car crooked across the road and came running toward the property. She stopped when she saw the cruisers, the ambulances, the CPS vans. She looked at me, and I watched her face go through every stage of understanding in about 10 seconds. Oh my God. Nathan, I didn't know. He told me it was like 4-H. He showed me brochures. There were testimonials from other parents. I didn't know. You didn't visit. 6 weeks, and you never came to see her. He said parents weren't allowed to visit during the adjustment period. He said it would disrupt the process. And that didn't seem wrong to you? She didn't have an answer. They arrested Brother Thomas at 8:30 that night. He tried to drive off the property in his Cadillac Escalade and ran straight into a state trooper's roadblock. He got out of the car calm, hands up, still talking in that smooth voice about religious persecution and parental consent and his constitutional rights. He talked all the way to the squad car. He talked while they read him his rights. He stopped talking when the door shut. 14 of his staff were arrested over the next 3 days. Some cooperated, some didn't. The woman who'd blocked my path turned out to be his daughter. She'd grown up in the program herself, started as a child in the fields, worked her way up to running them. She didn't know any other life. The trial took 7 months. I'd left the fishing crew by then, taken a welding job at a fabrication shop in New Braunfels. Less money, but I was home every night. Sophie and I rented a small house with a yard and a pecan tree she liked to read under. Brother Thomas got 35 years federal, labor trafficking, child endangerment, fraud, and 17 counts of unlawful imprisonment. No parole. Karen got 8 years. She hadn't known the full extent, but she'd signed guardianship papers without reading them, and she'd recruited 3 other families into the program. During her sentencing, something came out that shifted the ground under everything. Karen had spent 2 years in a similar program as a teenager, a work camp disguised as a reform school in East Texas. She'd been told the same things they told Sophie, that she was bad, that she deserved it. That hard work was God's love in action. She genuinely believed she was helping. That was the part that made me sick, because it meant the cycle was older than any of us. It meant Brother Thomas wasn't the beginning. He was just the latest in a chain that went back who knows how far. The other 37 children went home to their families. Most of their parents had no idea what was really happening. They'd trusted brochures and smiles and words like ministry and character building and faith-based. The boy from the orchard, Elijah, the one who'd asked me to be his dad, went back to a foster home in Austin. I kept tabs on him through CPS. He was quiet for a long time. Sophie started therapy the first week, twice a week with a woman named Dr. Kaplan, who specialized in childhood trauma. For the first month, Sophie wouldn't write. That's what gutted me. My daughter, who used to fill notebooks faster than I could buy them, who'd written a 40-page story about a cat detective when she was 8, told me that stories were a waste of time and she needed to do something useful. Brother Thomas had told her that writing was laziness, that imagination was the devil's playground, that the only words worth reading were scripture. I bought her a new notebook anyway, left it on the kitchen table with a pack of her favorite pens, didn't say anything about it. 3 weeks later, I woke up at 2 in the morning and found her sitting on the living room floor, writing. She'd filled 16 pages. She was crying, but she was writing. I sat down next to her, didn't talk, just sat there. She leaned against my arm and kept going. Slowly, Sophie came back. Not all at once. Some days were setbacks. She'd flinch at raised voices. She couldn't stand the smell of peaches for over a year. She had a recurring nightmare about the shed, about the dark, and the bolt sliding shut. But she wrote, and the writing changed. At first, it was angry. Stories where villains got punished and kids escaped and nobody could lock anyone up ever again. Then, it softened. Stories about families who found each other, about animals who protected each other, about light showing up in places where you'd stopped expecting it. Dr. Kaplan said Sophie was processing faster than most kids she'd worked with. She said the writing was Sophie's way of rebuilding her understanding of the world, making it make sense on her own terms. A year after the trial ended, a nonprofit in San Antonio that worked with trafficking survivors reached out. They were putting together a collection of stories written by children who'd been through programs like Brother Thomas's. They wanted to know if Sophie would contribute. She thought about it for a week. Then she sat down and wrote 6 pages. No title, just 6 pages about what happened, what she felt, what she wanted people to know. The last paragraph said this: "They told me my dad gave me away because I was too much trouble. They told me writing was a sin and my brain was broken and I needed to earn the right to exist. I believed them because I was 10 and they were adults, and that's what you do when you're a kid. You believe the adults. But my dad came for me. He didn't call first. He didn't wait. He climbed over a fence and walked into an orchard and picked me up and wouldn't put me down. That's what love is. It doesn't send a letter. It shows up. I've read that paragraph more times than I can count. It breaks me every time." 2 years after the rescue, Sergeant Vega called to tell me they'd shut down a third property connected to Brother Thomas's network, a blueberry farm near Tyler. 11 more kids. One of the staff arrested there had been running similar operations for 20 years, under different names in 4 states. The scope of it was staggering. These weren't isolated incidents. They were businesses, profitable ones. And they survived because they wrapped themselves in language that made people trust them. Ministry, foundation, character, faith. I started volunteering with the nonprofit in San Antonio. We trained parents on warning signs. We went to schools and churches and community centers. We taught people to ask the questions nobody had asked Karen. Can I visit any time without notice? Can my child call me whenever they want? What exactly does the daily schedule look like? Who has medical authority? Where do they sleep? Show me. We taught them that every legitimate program in the world welcomes a surprise visit from a parent. That if someone says you can't see your child during an adjustment period, that isn't a red flag. That's a siren. Sophie came with me to some of those talks. Not to speak, just to be there. She'd sit in the back, writing in her notebook, and sometimes afterward a parent would come up to me and say, "Is that your daughter?" And I'd say yes. And they'd say, "She looks happy." And she was. Most days, she really was. On the 2nd anniversary, Sophie asked if we could drive out to the property. I hadn't been back since that day. The orchard had been sold. The new owners had torn down the farmhouse and the barn and the shed. They'd kept the peach trees, but they'd planted wildflowers between the rows, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush and black-eyed Susans. Sophie stood at the edge of the orchard and looked out at the trees she'd worked under. The peaches were coming in, ripe and heavy on the branches. But between them, the wildflowers made the whole place look like something from one of her stories. "It doesn't feel the same," she said. "No, it's better. It's like somebody told the land it could be beautiful again." She pulled out her notebook and started sketching. Not writing this time, drawing, the peach trees with wildflowers beneath them. She wasn't great at drawing, but that wasn't the point. "Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart? Do you think Elijah's okay?" I'd gotten an update from his caseworker the month before. Elijah had been placed with a permanent foster family. He was in school. He was talking again. "He's doing better. He's got people looking out for him now." "Good," she kept drawing. "I want to find all of them someday. All the kids from the orchard. When we're older, I want to see who we became." "That's a good idea. Because we're not what happened to us. We're what we did after." I looked at my daughter, 12 years old, sitting in an orchard that had almost destroyed her, drawing wildflowers with a cheap pen in a notebook that cost $3. Her mother's face in her features, her mother's strength in her spine. "When did you get so smart?" She shrugged. "I've always been smart. You were just at sea." "Fair enough." We sat there for a while. The wind moved through the peach trees, and the wildflowers shifted in waves of color. It was beautiful in a way that felt earned, not given. The kind of beautiful that only exists because someone decided the ugliness wasn't the end of the story. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep with her notebook in her lap. The page was open to the drawing, peach trees and wildflowers. She'd written something small at the bottom in her careful handwriting. "Even the roots remember, but the flowers don't care." I kept driving, watched the road, thought about a locked shed with scratch marks at a child's height, thought about a 7-year-old boy asking a stranger to be his dad for a day. Thought about 38 children who'd worked in silence because they'd been taught that their voices didn't matter. There are thousands of operations like Brother Thomas's still running. Not all orchards. Some are camps, some are schools, some are therapy programs with professional websites and 5-star reviews from parents who never saw the locked rooms. They survive because they know what desperate families look like. Single parents working away from home, grandparents raising grandchildren, immigrants who don't know who to call. People who are one crisis away from needing help and one lie away from trusting the wrong person. I'd been that person. 6 weeks on a crab boat, trusting a woman I'd married too fast, wanting so badly to believe someone could hold it together while I was gone. I'd traded presents for a paycheck and hoped the gap wouldn't swallow my daughter. It almost did. The only thing that saved Sophie was a broken femur on a fishing boat. Tommy Reeves slipping on a wet deck, a bone snapping in 3 places, a captain deciding to turn around. If Tommy hadn't fallen, I'd have been at sea for another week. Sophie would have been in that orchard, picking peaches, believing her father had thrown her away. Not every parent gets a Tommy Reeves. So we tell the story. We go to the schools and the churches and the community centers, and we say, ask the questions. Visit without calling ahead. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. Don't wait for a broken bone, or a turned-around boat, or a lucky break. Trust the voice inside you that says, this isn't right, because that voice is usually the only one telling the truth. Sophie woke up as I pulled into our driveway. She blinked at the house, at the pecan tree, at the porch light I'd left on. We're home, she said. Yeah, baby, we're home. She gathered her notebook and her pens and climbed out. At the front door, she turned back. Hey, Dad? Yeah? Thanks for climbing the fence. I smiled. Best climb of my life. She went inside. I stood in the driveway for a minute, looking at the house, the warm light in the windows, the sound of my daughter's footsteps on the hardwood floor. 2 years ago, I'd come home to silence, and a bare desk, and a quilt folded too neatly. Now I came home to notebooks on every surface and pen caps on the floor and a 12-year-old who wrote stories about wildflowers growing in places that used to hurt. Healing isn't a straight line. Sophie still had nights where the dark was too dark and the quiet was too quiet. She still couldn't eat peaches. She still sometimes reached for my hand in public, like she needed to make sure I was real and solid and not going anywhere. But she wrote. Every single day, she wrote. And every single page was proof that they hadn't broken her, that the shed and the orchard and the lies about her mother and the silence and the heat and the hunger hadn't reached the part of her that mattered most. The part that saw the world and wanted to put it into words. The part that believed stories could matter. The part that was, despite everything, still her. And that, more than the trial, more than the sentencing, more than Brother Thomas spending the rest of his useful life behind bars, that was justice. My daughter, writing, my daughter, home, my daughter, free. But she shouldn't have had to fight that hard to stay herself. No child should.